It's that time of year again, spooky vibes and fun times. Here's a list of top 10 horror games you should check out this Halloween. This is the second top 10 Halloween list on the channel, completely different set of games. If you want to see the top 10 games I've recommended last Halloween, that video will be linked in the description below. For this year's list, I'm gonna bend the rules just a little bit. Most of them are straight up horror games, but I want to add some lighthearted, campy, horror adjacent games to spice things up a bit. Whether you are looking for something that is profoundly disturbing or even something that's a bit more casual and easygoing but with a horror theme or aesthetic put on top of it, you're in the right place. Kicking off this list, number 10, Amnesia: The Dark Descent. What is there to say about the first Amnesia that hasn't already been said? It is an all-time classic. This is the game that skyrocketed PewDiePie's YouTube career. It started off the entire horror let's play genre on YouTube, and it popularized what is now a tired trend of hide-and-seek horror games. But Amnesia: The Dark Descent is still the GOAT. This one isn't actually a survival horror game despite the label being often attributed to it. It's actually a Lovecraftian psychological horror game. In this horror adventure, you'll be wandering through a gothic setting with nothing but a lantern, a stockpile of tinder boxes, and your wits, solving puzzles using an impressive physics engine that makes the setting as immersive as it is. You have no means to defend yourself, and your only option is to run or hide. Don't let the name of the game fool you though, because in spite of being called Amnesia, hardly anybody's ever forgotten about this one. At number 9, we have Lone Survivor. The simplest way to describe Lone Survivor is that it's Silent Hill meets 2D pixel art. The aesthetic is grungy and the sound design is hellish. In spite of the two-dimensional layout, Lone Survivor is as old-school horror as it gets. Limited supplies, complicated map traversal, backtracking, every bullet counts, which incentivizes avoidance, and it captures a haunting atmosphere without the need of any high-end graphical fidelity. In a way, that's what makes Lone Survivor such a great horror game. It is up to you to fill in the blanks with your imagination. At number 8, we have Doom 64. Where the first two Doom games were trepidatious corridor shooters with lots of ass-kicking and fun music, Doom 64 takes a turn around the wrong corner and ends up somewhere really messed up. It still controls the same as its predecessors, but it's also a little bit more reserved, dialing down the campy action for an atmospheric horror aesthetic and a creepier, way more ambient soundtrack. I'm not sure if there's enough to say that Doom 64 is a survival horror game, but it definitely gets close. This is still a fun first-person shooter, first and foremost. It's just that it also happens to be a million times creepier than whatever came before. Number 7, Dead Rising. Would it even be a Halloween celebration without some good old-fashioned Romero zombies in a giant mall somewhere? Now, to be fair, Dead Rising isn't really a horror game, but more of a goofy action game that is deeply entrenched within horror tropes and iconography. And it's fun. That being said, this cult classic does suffer from some frustrating problems. The AI for the NPCs is so dumb it makes the zombie hordes look like a shopping mall full of Albert Einsteins. The controls, graphics, and especially the animations are extremely dated, the boss fights are as awkward as they are interesting, and there's an old guy on a walkie-talkie who just never shuts up. But even with all of that said, if you are a fan of George Romero, this is not just a zombie game, this is the zombie game. The crowd density of the undead still looks incredible and overwhelming, the amount of tools and weapons you have at your disposal is insane, literally anything is a weapon, and the mall has a personality so colorful and inviting that you just can't help but get sandwiched in for a pleasant stay. Number 6, Pumpkin Jack. Pumpkin Jack reminds me of PlayStation 1 and 2 games, mostly medieval 3D platformers such as Spyro, and even game adaptations of movie adaptations of books such as The Spiderwick Chronicles, A Series of Unfortunate Events, and Harry Potter. There's a few reasons why this isn't higher on the list, mostly due to it being a really short game and also because it's really easy to beat, even though it's just as easy to die in this game. But make no mistake, this is the most Halloween game on this list by a mile. I mean, you're literally playing as a pumpkin that looks like it escaped from the set of A Nightmare Before Christmas. And I just realized I'm inviting somebody to tell me it's a Christmas movie even though it's absolutely not. What have I done? You could say Pumpkin Jack is the Dark Souls of Halloween games for the shits and giggles, even if the difficulty here is the exact opposite, and you still wouldn't technically be wrong. Pumpkin Jack is extremely fun for how short it is, and it's because of a few things. It's incredibly easy on the eyes, the dialogue is extremely witty for such a self-aware and silly story, the music kicks ass, it's like listening to Danny Elfman teaming up with Tim Burton and Henry Selick all over again, and it respects your time. It was also made by just one developer, which is insane. If you want something lighthearted and casual that you can beat in 1 or 2 sittings, you absolutely cannot go wrong with this one. It's also an easy platinum. Number 5, Blasphemous. Pixel art has never looked better than it does in Blasphemous. This is an awesome Metroidvania game with presentation that looks phenomenal without ever actually looking pretty. Every frame looks disgusting, and admittedly that's what really draws me in and gets me immersed into the world. That and the beautiful sound design. You can just feel the heaviness, the unbearable weight of suffering, guilt, punishment, the brutality of it all. Blasphemous is oozing more than just blood all over the place, as disgusting as that may sound. Religious imagery conquers every frame and motion as well. The game's depictions are inspired by many things, such as paintings by Francisco Goya, to the European Gothic horror depictions of Dark Souls, and even Resident Evil 4. It is indeed a challenging game, although I wouldn't say it's as hard as people have made it out to be. At least in my experience, it's hardly the most difficult Metroidvania I've ever played. It's not even the most difficult Metroidvania on this list. It definitely draws inspirations from Souls-likes, but then again these days, what game doesn't? It's got a fun gameplay loop, the imagery is unsettling, the soundtrack is amazing, the voice acting is amazing, and this is the best looking 2D pixel art I've ever seen. Number 4, Echo. Okay, that joke was fucking dumb. I've never played Echo until last week, and I'm confident that 99% of you watching have never played it either. I don't really know what to say except that Echo deeply surprised me, and no, not in a help step bro I'm stuck kinda way. I have heard it's a unique game, but there aren't many people talking about how great it is, and those who have often talk about it being a stealth game. Echo's not your ordinary stealth game. It's not even just a stealth game. It might be too soon to say it, given I'm about 3/4 of the way through the campaign, but I might have just stumbled upon the most underrated sci-fi survival horror game of all time. I wish I was kidding, but I'm not. It's such a shame knowing that Echo's developer studio, Ultra, have closed their doors a few years ago given the low sales figures, because now I wish I could look forward to a sequel. Isn't that great? The only real downside I think one should expect is the somewhat poor optimization. Echo stutters a lot, and it even crashed on me twice in the first 5 minutes on the PlayStation 4 Pro. But I'm happy to report that it never crashed on me again once you get to the palace after the intro. It only gets better from there on. And if placing it at the number 4 spot on my ranking for a Halloween list of all things should mean anything to you, then get ready to be surprised. If you love sci-fi films with an art house quality to them, and you love being trapped in a sprawling labyrinth full of wonderful architecture like say the Spencer Mansion from Resident Evil, then ding ding, we have a winner. This is not your typical horror game, so don't expect any jump scares, but there's a blend of sentient AI and cosmic horror here that I have found to be profoundly terrifying. Now we're headed to the top 3, but before we get to it, I want to shout out a game from last year as an honorable mention, and that is Ender Lilies, Quietest of the Nights. This came out in the summer of last year. I finally finished this one a few months ago, and all I have to say is, wow, this is a masterpiece. I haven't played that many traditional 2D Metroidvanias. I've mostly played the 3D ones like Resident Evil 1 and 2 remakes, the Dark Souls trilogy, and Journey to the Savage Planet. But Ender Lilies is the one true Metroidvania game that made me want to get into more Metroidvania games. It's one of the most hauntingly beautiful games in recent memory. It is similar to Dark Souls in a way. You roll and dodge behind enemies, you can't get too greedy with your attacks, and you need to learn attack patterns. But Ender Lilies does something that is really interesting, something that Elden Ring also does, but not quite on the same level. And that is the ghost summons. That's right, this game did Spirit Ashes before Spirit Ashes were even cool. I wonder which of these games came up with the idea first and whether or not one game actually influenced the other. I honestly really don't know, but what I do know is that Ender Lilies has executed this idea tremendously well. These are not just supplementary and disposable tools, they are everything the combat hinges on. As Priestess Lily, you set out to cure the kingdom from something called the Blight, which is this game's equivalent of going hollow. But the thing is, Lily doesn't know how to fight back. The ghost of a fallen knight has been appointed as her guardian and gets to do all the fighting, protecting her and ensuring she gets to wherever she needs to go. As you progress and the knight defeats more bosses, they are freed from the Blight and use their regained free will to fight for you and your cause. The roster of spirits is amazing, with a healthy variety that you can mix and match. The world is bleak in a way that is truly enchanting. The gameplay loop loop and level design is awesome and it doesn't overstay its welcome, and the Ghibli-esque soundtrack is one of my all-time favorites. With that out of the way, let's get to the top 3. Number 3, Tormented Souls. This is the ultimate modern spooky house simulator, drawing inspiration from the Resident Evil 1 and 2 remakes and the original Silent Hill 2. Wow, I can't believe I actually have to specify original Silent Hill 2 from now on. I mean, it's getting a remake, isn't that crazy? Tormented Souls is a love letter to both franchises, and in just about every aspect, it really knows how to walk a fine line between the tones of Resident Evil's survival horror and Silent Hill's psychological horror. If you love the old school quirks of either franchise, you might like it, but if you like the old school quirks of both, you're gonna have a field day with this one. If you would like to know more about Tormented Souls, you can check out my in-depth review, which I'll leave a link to at the top of the screen. Number 2, Hollow Knight. I've got a confession to make. I really like Hollow Knight, but I don't love it. At least, not yet I don't. So why on earth is it number 2 on my list? A few reasons. First of all, from what I've noticed, most people fall head over heels in love with this game, and I can definitely see why. And second, just look at the aesthetic, the mesmerizing world Team Cherry has conjured up here. I've had to overcome several hurdles to enjoy Hollow Knight, but there's one thing that kept me always going, and that's the vibe that it has. There's plenty of games that have that Tim Burton spark, but this is literally Tim Burton the video game. Everything from the color palette, the expressionist aesthetic, to the eccentricities of its lovable and funny characters, all the way to the wonderful music. It just doesn't resemble that Tim Burton nostalgia. It bathes in it. It screams it like a cry in outer space that while you can't hear it, you can sense it in every fiber of your being. I only got the first ending, which I think is the bad one, and even though I felt burnt out by the end, I also feel like I'm missing out on something greater here, and that is why it's at number 2. I might not feel like it's one of the best games I've played so far, but it is oddly one of the most unforgettable games I've experienced. I'll never forget the moment I arrived at the City of Tears. Best to just leave it at that. Number 1 Halloween game of 2022 is Darkwood. Darkwood is easily one of the best modern survival horror games I've played, and I'm not even into top-down games. Well, I guess I am now. Darkwood is one ugly, unsettling beast of a horror game, and I mean that in a good way. Set in a seriously screwed up forest somewhere in Poland, you play as someone known as the Stranger, one of the few people, if not the only person, who actually knows the way out of the forest, as some cataclysmic event has caused the woods to grow at an unprecedented rate, trapping the people inside with no escape from their own houses and the creatures that lurk around at night. Speaking of houses, that's where you come in. Pun intended. Your job is to look around for resources all day while conserving what you already have so that you can fortify your hideout and prepare for the horrors that await you at night. In the meantime, you're fighting folklorish monsters and eldritch horrors, and when you are not, you're striking up conversations with some exceptionally well-written and striking-looking characters full of shining personalities, and that's without any voice acting. Darkwood is a survival horror game through and through, but when the nighttime comes, there's a remarkable psychological horror element that comes swinging the door open wide. And the best part, when it does, there's no one there. Or maybe there is. And with that, the Rayven draws to a conclusion. Thank you so much for watching, have a happy Halloween, and remember, always respect the woods.